Hello and welcome to the show that debates, deconstructs and demystifies the burning issues of the day. This is The Big Picture and I am Athar Khan. Pakistan's Supreme Court on Monday held Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani in contempt of court for failing to push ahead with investigations into allegations of graft against the country's president, opening the door for future legal moves to oust the government. The nature of the crisis in Pakistan is changing rapidly amid significant developments on the political front. President Asif Ali Zardari met the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Khalid Shamim Win, on Monday. The meeting came just hours after the Supreme Court decided to begin contempt of court proceedings against the embattled Prime Minister for the government's failure to obey its order to pursue corruption charges against President Zardari. Analysts believe that the meeting between Zardari and Win was part of the ongoing backdoor efforts to strike a deal between the civilian government and the military leadership. After Gilani offered to resign yesterday before calling a special session of National Assembly, the Parliament of Pakistan, conjecture about Gilani's fate started in Pakistan. The beleaguered Prime Minister might just have to resign in the face of mounting pressure from the Supreme Court and the all-powerful military establishment. Pakistan's Parliament passed a resolution last night vowing to maintain the supremacy of democracy and Parliament. The ruling government is now being rumoured to be more amenable to the idea of Gilani's resignation in return for a ceasefire against the president. Amid all this, Gilani has said that he will respect the summons of the Supreme Court and present himself on the 19th of Jan. At the same time, maintaining a defiant stand by saying that Senate elections will be held on time and the government will complete its term. Tonight on The Big Picture, we'll try to deconstruct all possible scenarios that could be played out in Pakistan over the next few days. Joining me in the studio is Vinod Sharma, political editor of Hindustan Times. Also joining me is TCA Rangachari, former ambassador, also served as Deputy High Commissioner in Pakistan. Joining us on the show later will be Happyman Jacob, who teaches at JNU. But I'd like to start the show with Mr. Sharma, if I could. Despite the last minute firefighting by Gilani, do you think, like most analysts in Pakistan believe, Gilani's days are numbered?
Well, I did feel that until last night, and I think I must mention that his speech in Parliament was pretty impressive. I watched it. But today, as the news comes in, Mr. Aitazaz Ahsan is going to be his lawyer in the Supreme Court. And as all of us know, Mr. Ahsan was the one who led the lawyers' movement for restoration of the judiciary that was thought to be consigned to the dustbin, so to speak, by Mr. General Parvez Musharraf. Now, having said that, I must also mention that Mr. Aitazaz Ahsan has several times in his capacity, personal capacity, though he's a regular member of the PPP and he's a member of the National Executive, if I'm not wrong, has said that the government must write a letter in line with the Supreme Court's direction to the Swiss courts. Right. Now, one wonders on what line shall he argue in the court. And an easy guess is that he shall be arguing the immunity enjoyed by President Zardari under Article 248. And,
which guarantees immunity to the president.
Which guarantees immunity to the president. And that also explains, regardless of what view the court takes of it, Mr. Gilani's lack of action on the directions of the Supreme Court.
Right.
What complicated the matters before the court gave its judgment, and I must also slightly correct you, that the court hasn't yet held Mr. Gilani in contempt.
Just
it has served a show cause notice to show cause whether he should, why he should not be held in contempt. Now that gives Mr. Gilani adequate space to explain his position. Yesterday, in his address to the National Assembly, he recalled that he was the one who said that the judiciary will be restored even before he took oath as Prime Minister.
Right.
So I think that there is a possibility today, as I see it, because situation is fast changing, of Mr. Gilani perhaps gaining a reprieve, depending much on what will happen on the 19th before the court.
Let's get a Pakistan perspective before I come to you, former ambassador. I think we have Sajjad Malik, senior journalist, on the phone line from Pakistan. Sajjad, if you can hear me, my question to you, Vinod Sharma thinks that he might get a reprieve sometime soon, but do you think last night's passionate speech in Parliament, where he praised both the military as well as the judiciary, could be an effort of say, mending fences? Do you think that's too late now?
Yeah, Yeah, I don't think it is late because government still has got some cards up its sleeves, and the decision that Mr. Ijaz Ahsan would represent Gilani in the court, that's a very wise decision, and I think the things are now becoming a bit clear that what Gilani would do. I think he would follow what Mr. Ijaz has been saying for some time, that the government should write the letter. And if he gives this commitment to the court that he would write the letter, I think this is what the court wants. So I think that they have got something, and I believe that they can come out of this.
Right, Sajjad, very quickly, if I could ask you one more question before I come to Mr. Rangachari. Do you think there is any possibility of Zardari jettisoning Gilani and replacing him with someone else? Is there a possibility at all, just to appease the judiciary and make peace with the army?
I don't think that Gilani is the problem. The problem is Mr. Zardari himself, as far as the army is concerned, or the court is concerned. So just getting rid of Gilani and replacing him with some other person will not solve the issue. The basic issue is that the government should write the letter to the Swiss authorities. And if Gilani is not writing, I don't think any person who is coming to replace him, he or she would write the letter. So the basic problem is that they should follow and implement the decision of the court. And if Mr. Gilani is going to do it, he would be okay. If he is not going to follow that, it means that none else would be able to do it.
Right, Sajjad, stay with us. We'll come back to you, but let me go to Mr. Rangachari and ask for his opinion. You've served in Pakistan for a while, and what's your sense? What's the sense that you're getting right now? Where is Gilani right now? Do you agree with Mr. Sharma when he said he might get a reprieve?
Well, before we get to the future of Mr. Gilani, I think one thing which probably is worth noting is that for the first time, you have civilian institutions who are fighting each other out, so to speak, or who are calling into account each other. This is something which is it has been rather rare, and it's precisely because of the fact that the civilian institutions have not been able to do this, some kind of enforce accountability and so on, that the army has found it very easy to step in. So in that sense, I think you might see this as a positive step, the Supreme Court on one side, the government on the other side, the legal processes and so on. Insofar as Mr. Gilani is concerned, I think I would agree with your guest from Pakistan that the question really is not whether a person stays on as Prime Minister. It's more a question of what do you do with the basic issue of accountability. And if the President is to be held accountable, right or wrong is a matter for the court to decide. If the President is to be held accountable, then what is the methodology that would be followed? Mr. Vinod Sharma mentioned quite rightly the immunity, but the immunity is only till such time as he is in office. Now, therefore, there is nothing which says that you should not complete the investigation, and maybe you would take action after he demits office. Now, this is not something which is unprecedented. It's not happened in Pakistan, but you have an example, for example, in France, where the former president of France, there were court proceedings against him, and there was a certain sentence which was passed against him, and so on. So, therefore, if the court is saying that conduct an investigation, that is something which can go on parallelly with the immunity provision. And later on, the court or the government or whoever is there will decide whether or not any action is to be taken.
Quick follow-up to you. What about Zardari himself? Maybe not now, maybe later. Memogate hearing is coming up. Mansoor Ijaz might try and nail him as a conspirator in Memogate. Do you think there is a chance that the courts might go after Zardari also?
Well, actually, the court's role in that, to my mind, seems little odd. Because here is a document which has been, what is the law that is being violated, if there is a law, provision of law that is being violated? Is criticism of the army illegal, unlawful? Is criticism of the ISI illegal, unlawful? What is the provision of the law under which the court would act and say that the government should have done this or shouldn't have done this, and somebody has been at fault or somebody has not been at fault? I'm not sure we have explored those angles. And maybe your guest from Pakistan can throw some light on whether there is any discussion on that aspect in Pakistan, and if so, which direction is that discussion heading.
Absolutely. We'll ask him that question. Sajjad, stay with us. We'll come back to you right after the break. After the break, we'll talk about that issue and lots more. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still with The Big Picture. Sajjad Malik, if I could come straight to you again and ask you this. In the NRO case, Gilani has already been slapped with a notice. Do you see the courts going after Zardari as well? Do you think any chance? Because he is, after all, the co-chairman of the PPP, the party in power.
Well, directly, I don't think that the court is going after him, but indirectly, you see, though Gilani is the Prime Minister and he has got all the rights under the parliamentary system, but it is Mr. Zardari who controls the show, basically. And everybody knows in Pakistan that he is the in charge, actually. So when the court is going to hit Mr. Gilani, indirectly Zardari would be heard. And if Gilani is convicted under the contempt of court charges, then I don't think that the government would be able to survive. Replacing Zardari or bring Gilani or bringing some other person would not solve the problem. So Zardari will be feeling the heat if anything happens with Gilani.
Right.
But directly going after him, I don't think, because there is no direct charge against Zardari. Right. And it would be Gilani, basically.
Right. Sajjad, Vinod Sharma, political editor of the Hindustan Times, is sitting right next to me. He would like to ask you a question.
Sajjad Sahab, you know, there have been certain analysts in Pakistan who have been indicating the possibility of the government eventually writing a letter to the Swiss courts, but mentioning in the same breath that the president enjoys immunity so long as he is president, and that the courts may proceed, but they must bear this factor in mind. Now, would that satisfy the courts of law? Would that satisfy the apex court there?
Well, this is the basic commitment which the court wants from the government, and this was the basic order. When this NRO case was decided by the court in December 2009, one of the directives which was issued by the court and which was part of the decision was that the government should write a letter to the Swiss authorities, and they should withdraw another letter which was written in 2008. In that letter, the government of Pakistan said that under NRO, we would like to withdraw all the cases which had been earlier filed with the Swiss authorities. So what now the court is demanding that the government should write another letter and they should request the Swiss authorities that they should reopen those cases. Now, if the government is going to do that, one of the basic requirements of the Supreme Court would be fulfilled. And I think that would be would satisfy the court. And it is more of symbolic, actually. You know that Swiss court is not going to move against the president because he is the president and he has got the immunity under the international laws as well. But symbolically, it would be a big victory for the court, for the rule of law in Pakistan. And that's why everybody is insisting that the government should fulfill this basic demand, because it would set a precedent for the governments, and for other people, and as well as for the other institutions. That actually nobody is above the law, and even a sitting president can be prosecuted.
Another thing, that in his speech yesterday in Parliament, the Prime Minister gave an example. He said that if I were to increase the salaries of members of Parliament, would the members of Parliament be individually held accountable if there was something wrong with it, or I should be held accountable? No, his allusion quite clearly was to Pervez Musharraf, who brought this NRO, giving them immunity to return home and participate in election. And we all know that it was part of a deal to end the political isolation of Pervez Musharraf, who at that point of time was without any political supporters in Pakistan, and the Americans wanted him to garner some political support. So what do you see, what future do you see for Musharraf? Would he come back? And is the Supreme Court really serious in pursuing cases against him? After all, they have held NRO illegal under the Constitution.
Well, unfortunately, we have not seen any seriousness from the Superior Court on this part, because not only he should be held accountable for NRO, but he should be also held accountable for other cases, like the killing of Akbar Bukti in Balochistan. Like twice he actually abrogated the Constitution, and under Article 6 of the Constitution, anyone who is going to abrogate the Constitution, he should be held accountable, and the maximum punishment is death sentence for that. So this is sort of disappointment for many people that when we talk about the rule of law, the court is actually focused on the government and especially on Zardari. There are a number of other cases. For example, one of the cases against Mr. Nawaz Sharif is pending since 1996. And there has been a lot of criticism that why the court is not taking that case, why it's not prosecuting that case, why it is only focused on Zardari. So when we talk about Musharraf, there are a number of cases. For example, there are cases against him for this Red Mosque operation. As far as his coming back to the country is concerned, he has announced that he would be coming back before the end of this month. But it would be very difficult for him because what the government says that whenever he's going to come back, he would be arrested.
Right.
Because there are cases against him.
Right. Sajjad, stay with us if you can. I'd go to Mr. Rangachari now. He mentioned the opposition and Musharraf as well. Where do you see the rest of the opposition, the smaller parties going there? Imran Khan is on the offensive, criticizing everyone in government. Musharraf wants to come back. PMLN, Nawaz Sharif's party, walked out of the parliament speech last night. Where do you see them aligning themselves really right now?
Well, as far as the what you call the smaller parties, really they have their own respective bases in different provinces. The general tendency, and I think this is not peculiar to Pakistan, is that the smaller parties tend to go with whichever national party is likely to come to power because they see some advantage in it, unless they happen to have very, very serious ideological differences and they're not able to go with one or the other of the national mainstream political parties. Insofar as the present situation is concerned, I think what should be considered as heartening is that almost all of the political parties have spoken very clearly about democracy, wanting democracy to prevail. This is a very different situation, let's say, from 30 years ago, when there were large number of political parties which were appealing to the military. Or even for that matter, in 1999, the coup that General Musharraf did. But there was a certain sense of acceptance by the people. Now, this is very different. I think today, in that sense, the smaller parties will play a political game, seeing whatever number of the seats that they are able to garner from their respective constituencies, and that is to say their support base, and then using that support, using the numbers, in order to see whatever kind of alliances or deals that they can make, whichever political party emerges with the possibility of forming a government.
Right.
So in that sense, I think the political process playing itself out should be considered as a plus.
Right. Taking off from that point, he mentioned it's a very important point for democracy in Pakistan. Do you see the whole event that was played out yesterday, first Gilani offering to resign, then he made a passionate speech in parliament and managed to get the support and a resolution passed. Rehman Malik gave a statement today saying we're backing him to the hilt and democracy will prevail. Do you see this like as a stand against non-democratic forces in Pakistan? Do you see it as perhaps, if not over-labeling it, a watershed in Pakistani democratic history?
I have a different take on this. Of course, there is a political consensus across parties in Pakistan that they will not countenance a military intervention. But the basic question is the military today in a position to intervene? I don't think so, because compared to previous years when the military walked in at the expense of an unpopular government, today the military itself has problems of credibility. It has fallen in popular esteem, and that is so on account of a slew of factors, starting from the permission the army itself gave for drone attacks on Pakistani territory by the NATO forces in the United States, then the 3-year extension which the army chief has got, which has not really gone down well with his peers. You have this problem of the army chief, the Osama bin Laden, the Abbottabad raid, the 2 dozen soldiers getting killed in NATO airstrikes.
And Kiani responding to that.
And Kiani responding to that. And more importantly, you see, Kiani came in for a lot of close questioning by his own junior officers in one of the interactions post-Abbottabad. And then the incident of Mehran Air Base, Naval Base, and followed by reports that there has been infiltration by Al-Qaeda and Taliban in the rank and file of the armed forces. Now, this is a very serious situation for the army. And army cannot today, in my view, do without a civilian interface to resolve the problems which perhaps require a politico-military solution.
Right, fair point, fair point. We'll come back to that, and also we'll talk about the various scenarios that could be played out in the next couple of days in Pakistan. We have lots more to come after the break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're still watching The Big Picture. If I could go straight again to Sajjad Malik in Pakistan. Sajjad, my question to you would be, no democratic government, no civilian government has ever completed its term in Pakistan. This government, it seems, is bent upon being the first. Now, do you see Gilani as a man who can withstand crises? He's been seen as a man of consensus in Pakistan. Do you think if he managed to diffuse this particular situation, if he manages to get out of this pickle, it could be possibly, perhaps, the setting up of strong fundamentals for democracy in Pakistan?
Well, it would be, but I don't think that the government would be able to complete its term, because I think that before the end of this year, somewhere in, if everything goes well, even then the elections would be held somewhere in September or October. Because there is a momentum going on, and the opposition parties are pressing the government for the fresh elections. And even if he survives all this, what is going on, the government would like to go to the people and seek the fresh mandate.
Right, sir. Mr. Rangachari, another scenario that has been talked about in the past couple of days is that of a constitutional coup. Judiciary dissolves the government and early elections. Do you think that's possible?
Well, I'm not sure that there is any provision under which the court could take an action like that. And if the court is advocating rule of law, then it must abide by the rule of law itself.
Right.
But let me go back to a point that you had just made about whether or not the government is able to complete its term. Even if the government is not able to complete its term, it doesn't mean the end of democracy, because as we know, there are many countries where elections are held well ahead of schedule. Governments calculate what is the best time at which they could get popular support, maybe improve the number of seats that they have in the Parliament, National Assembly, whatever. And therefore, it's not so much the question of time, but whether, as your guest from Pakistan said, that the next elections are held, whether it is September, October this year, whether it is when it is due in March, February, March next year. The elections are held, and the elections are free and fair, and the political processes are allowed to be followed. I think there, what Mr. Vinod Sharma just mentioned about the, if I might put it as the likelihood of popular acceptance of a military intervention today being very, very low, is something which again is a factor which is positive in favor of the continuance of a political process, continuation of a democratic process. And I think that is something which every Pakistani would certainly, I hope that every Pakistani would be happy about, because if another election takes place, and if another government comes in, a civilian government is able to last out 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it might be, that perhaps is a better guarantee for continuance of democracy in Pakistan.
Right. Mr. Sharma, you heard both our guests, Sajjad from Pakistan and Mr. Rangachari. What is your take on this? And where do you actually see Gilani riding this storm out and coming on top, Senate elections on time, and perhaps an advantage to the PPP because of the people they might side with?
You see, I must tell you that I am, since yesterday, more sanguine about democracy prevailing and Mr. Gilani managing to buy time. You see, the PPP is seeking to buy time until February and March, when the elections to the Senate are due. And this will give them a majority in the upper house and thereby a stake in legislation making, even if they don't come to power after the next elections.
Right.
That is their game. And they seem to be working towards that objective. Secondly, this is a hugely unpopular government because it has not extended relief delivered to the people in the sense people expected them to deliver. Yet the PPP is not a spent force. It's the only pan-Pakistan party that they have. And Benazir used to say that there are just two institutions in Pakistan, one the army and the second the PPP. And the kind of turf war that I see between Imran Khan and Nawaz Sharif, whose constituencies overlap, they are the right of the center space. The PPP eventually may still emerge as the single largest party or a force enough to call the shots in the next assembly. So I think the game is wide open, and the only, I think that they should be rather discreet than valorous in dealing with the court. And insofar as Memogate is concerned, I see Memogate, I wonder whether Ambassador Rangachari agrees with me, I see Memogate as just a ploy by the army to show the civilian government as more pro-American than they actually have been. And the fact is that both entities in Pakistan have been pro-America, and America being a four-letter word today in Pakistan, that you see this whole charade of a... And Mr. Nawaz Sharif too, there was a deal almost, I think, to bury this between the army and the civilian leadership and the government, I mean, that when Mr. Nawaz Sharif, who's perceived to be close to Iftikhar Chaudhry, moved that petition, that the court should probe it, while the government insisted that it should be done by a parliamentary committee.
Let's give Mr. Rangachari a chance to reply. We are almost out of time, but let's respond to that. Do you agree that Memogate was just a ploy by the army to make sure that the government looks comes in bad light?
Well, actually, it is the army which has been pushing for the fact that it's very critical of the army, it's very critical of the ISI, that the honor of the army must be vindicated, it should not be criticized, etc., and so on. Now, for exactly the reasons that Mr. Vinod Sharma earlier pointed out, it hardly lies in the mouth of the army to claim that sort of thing, having done what it has done over the past, so many years of this war against terror. So, but then that is one of the facts of life that one has to deal with as far as Pakistan is concerned.
Right.
And we, on the Indian side, I think we should hope that the political processes, the democratic processes, they continue. Even if, as it happens, as Mr. Vinod Sharma said, maybe this government is not very popular today. Some other government may come in place. That doesn't matter. So long as it's civilian leadership, that should be something which should be positive.
We'll have to end on that note. Thank you, Mr. Rangachari. Thank you, Mr. Vinod Sharma. I'd like to thank Sajjad Malik, also from Pakistan, who joined us. We're almost out of time, but I must say this, that the key takeaway from tonight's big picture is, of course, that the likelihood of the military intervening in Pakistan is becoming a far-out possibility. That's good news for India and the rest of the world. We hope, and the panel hopes, and everyone else here hopes, that due process, political processes continue in Pakistan. That would be best for everyone. Thank you for joining us on The Big Picture. Till next time, thank you and good night.